Hi, I'm Brad. I'm a hiring manager in tech, and today I'm going to talk about how someone gets hired. Specifically, I want to talk about two things. The first is the people that are involved in getting you hired at a company, and the second thing is the actual hiring process. For the hiring process, it can definitely vary by organization. I work in tech and mostly have worked at large technology companies like Google and Uber, so I'll focus on the process that most large tech companies tend to follow. Let's start with the people. There are four main people that are involved in the hiring process typically. They're sourcers, recruiters, recruiting coordinators, and hiring managers. Sometimes there are other people involved, but these four roles are critically important to how you get hired at a company, and typically you'll interact with each of these at some point in the process. Let's start with sourcers. This one you might not have ever actually heard of before. It's sort of a lesser known thing. You might think that this is a recruiter, but often it's a distinct role from a recruiter. So, a sourcer's job is basically to find people. Essentially, if you've ever gotten a message on LinkedIn from someone saying, "Hey, my company's hiring. From your profile, it seems like you might be a good fit. Do you want to talk about this?" There's a pretty good chance that the person who reached out to you was actually a sourcer and not a recruiter. Depending on the company and the role, there may not be a dedicated sourcer. Sometimes a recruiter will do this, and sometimes the hiring manager will source for themselves. If I'm hiring for my team, I almost always try to do my own sourcing. So what that means is I go out on LinkedIn and I search for skills and keywords related to the role I'm trying to fill. And then I'll personally reach out and say, "Hey, I'm an engineering director. I'm hiring for this team in this role, and I think you'd be a good fit. Do you want to chat about that?" A lot of times as a hiring manager or an engineering director or sort of a senior leadership person in a company, it's easier to get responses on LinkedIn because a lot of people get a lot of recruiter spam. And honestly, a lot of recruiter spam is for roles that aren't actually a good fit for the person's background. So when you say, "I'm not a recruiter, I'm the hiring manager," people tend to pay a little bit closer attention and are more likely to engage. So it can be a little easier for an engineering manager or an engineering director to source for themselves sometimes. Typically, hiring managers will give sourcers some guidance on what kind of people they're looking for to help them narrow down their search. So, for example, I might say, "I'm looking for someone that knows how to use GitHub," or "I'm looking for someone with experience in SQL or Python," or "I think people that work at Facebook might be good fits for this role. So, reach out to people that work at Facebook and see if they're interested in talking to us." That can help narrow the search down quite a bit. The next person I want to talk about is the recruiter. You've almost certainly interacted with a recruiter at some point if you've applied for or interviewed for a job. Typically, the recruiter is your primary point of contact throughout the hiring process. Recruiters will often do a sort of initial fit check or a phone screen. So, this is a sort of interview where they ask you about your background, they talk to you about what you've worked on, they might ask you if you have experience or certain skill sets, but they're not really doing a technical evaluation. Recruiters often don't have much in the way of technical skills, but they get guidance from the hiring manager around, "We're looking for people with this type of background, this type of experience. So find us people that look like this," kind of. Based on those conversations, if it seems like a mutual fit, you're interested in the role, and the recruiter thinks you fit the criteria that the hiring manager has specified, they'll take your resume and forward it on to the hiring manager. The other thing that recruiters do is essentially serve as your point of contact and communicate with you throughout the hiring process. So they'll give you updates like, "We're in the process of scheduling your interviews," or "Your packet is with the hiring committee and under review, and we should have an update for you by such and such date." Lastly, if the company decides to hire you, you'll probably end up negotiating your salary with the recruiter, which is something to keep in mind. Recruiters are often very personable. They've got really great people skills. They're kind of gassing you up and talking to you a lot throughout the process and giving you great feedback and trying to keep you excited about the role because part of their job is to close you and get you to accept an offer if the company makes an offer. But they also are going to take any information that you share with them throughout the hiring process, and there's a decent chance that they'll use that in the negotiation process. So, for example, if a recruiter asks you, "Why are you thinking about leaving your job?" and you say, "I hate my job. My boss is such an asshole. Really, I'm just desperate to find anything." And then you go through the interview process and you do really well, you might get an offer back that's less than you want, but the recruiter says, "Hey, remember, you're so unhappy at your job. Your boss is kind of an asshole. You think of how great it will be to work somewhere else and have new coworkers and how much you liked the people you talked to." And, essentially You want to keep your cards a little close to the chest when you're interacting with the recruiter because they are there to help you and support you through the hiring process, but ultimately they represent the company that you're interviewing with. They're not your best friend. They're not your buddy. They're not necessarily trying to get you as much money as you can possibly get or to find the perfect role for you. They're trying to find a person that can fill a need for an organization, and that might be you. Supporting the recruiter is a recruiting coordinator. A recruiting coordinator is focused more on the tactical aspects of the recruiting process. The recruiter is dealing with the strategic considerations like salary negotiation and are you the right fit for the role and that sort of thing. Recruiting coordinator is focused more on the tactical aspects of the recruiting and hiring process. So one of the main things that they do is assist with scheduling. So they'll reach out to you and get your availability for interviews. And then internally, if you're going to go through a full hiring panel, which might be 4, 5, or 6 people, they have to coordinate the schedules of those individuals that will interview you, get things booked, get rooms scheduled, essentially deal with all the minutia of having 4 or 5 tightly grouped meetings to evaluate you as a candidate for the role. The last role I want to talk about is the hiring manager. So the hiring manager defines the role. This is typically the person who runs the team that the opening is on, and they define the skill set they're looking for, how much experience they require. The hiring manager tells recruiting and sourcing what they're looking for, and they'll almost always be one of your interviewers at some stage in the interview process. This is pretty obvious, but the hiring manager will probably be your boss, assuming you're offered the job and you accept. Sometimes it might be your boss's boss if the person that you work most closely with in a leadership role is more junior or isn't technically a people manager, such as a tech lead that might oversee the technical vision or direction of a team, but not handle the HR aspects of people management. Now that we've talked about sourcers, recruiters, recruiting coordinators, and hiring managers, let's talk about the hiring process itself. So typically the hiring process starts in one of 2 ways. Either you get a message on LinkedIn or in your email inbox or something similar, or you apply online and submit your resume for a job that you see posted somewhere. The next step is typically a phone screen. This is often a casual chat more than an interview, and it can be with the hiring manager or with a recruiter. Just kind of depends. But this is mostly about doing a kind of gut check. Are you a fit for the role? Are you interested in the role? A question that gets asked a lot in phone screens is, how seriously are you looking? Are you just starting maybe to consider taking a new role? Are you not actually looking at all? Are you desperate to find a new job because you hate the current role you're in, or you're burned out, or you're just ready for a change? A lot of times you'll talk about this during the phone screen. Lastly, you might get an overview of the interview process. It's pretty common for them to walk you through the phases of the interview that you'll go through to give you a sense of what all is involved and what the timeline looks like. For example, you'll do a technical phone screen, you'll do a panel of interviews, you'll do an on-site. They'll generally give you a rough outline of those details just so you sort of know what to expect. The next step, at least at most tech companies, is often a technical phone screen. This is the first real evaluation of your technical skills, and you'll often get some kind of generic data structures and algorithms problem or general software engineering problem, at least if you're applying for a software engineering role. If you work in a more niche area, or maybe you're a product manager or something like that, you'll get some kind of case study or problem that's tailored to the skills expected of the role. So if you're a data scientist, you might get some sort of data analysis problem. The next stage is what we used to call an on-site interview, because back in 2019 and before, you would go to the office of a company where you were interviewing and meet people in person. I know that's a crazy idea these days, but we used to do on-site interviews. Now it's sometimes called a virtual on-site. This is a collection of interviews, often with 4 to 6 people, covering various domains and aspects of the role. So for a software engineering interview process, this would often be 1 or 2 coding interviews, maybe a systems design type of interview or some other technical interview, a hiring manager interview, which is often a culture and fit check and general team assessment, and then sometimes there's what's called a bar raiser, which is essentially, is this person going to up-level our skills? Are they not a jerk? Sort of just general company fit. The on-site interview panel will also almost always feature people from the team you'll work directly on, and possibly your hiring manager if you haven't already had some sort of interview with the hiring manager. This is basically just a way to validate, is this someone I actually want to work with? Are they going to fit within the team? Are they going to contribute in the ways that we need them to? Do they have the right background? That sort of stuff. After you've done your on-site or virtual on-site interview, the interviewers will have what's called a debrief or a roundtable. This is basically a meeting where they all get together and they share their feedback on you in the interview process. So essentially you go around the table and say, yes, I think we should hire this person, or no, I don't think we should hire this person, and here's why. The goal is to get to some kind of consensus and to have general agreement that yes, someone is a good fit, or no, they're not a good fit and we shouldn't move forward. But it's important to remember that the hiring manager can veto the decision of the panel in most cases. You wouldn't want a bunch of interviews to say that you're great, but the hiring manager doesn't think you're so great, and then you end up on that person's team, and now you have a manager who thinks you're a bad fit or don't have the skills to do the job. So this kind of makes sense. Assuming that you've made it through all your interviews and the panel has decided to hire you, now we enter what I'll call the close. The close is what it sounds like. You're going to interact with your recruiter. You're going to get a little bit of feedback. Usually they're going to say, everyone thought you were great. We're really excited about you. I'm excited to share details with you about the opportunity. At this stage, if you haven't already, you'll probably talk about salary. You might do some negotiation. If you have other offers or you seem like you're on the fence about joining, but the team is really excited about you, at this point, you might get invited to visit an office, especially if there's one local to you so it doesn't involve having to travel. If you're a really important strategic hire, like you have some ultra rare, valuable skill set, and they think you'd be so amazing to have, they might even pay to fly you out to an office so that you can see things and basically so that they can woo you. When everything's said and done, the recruiter will often make you a verbal offer over the phone or will email you offer details and then send you a formal offer letter. If you accept it, then you've been hired, and that's the hiring process. I hope this overview of the roles and the steps in the hiring process has been helpful. I know this can be a bit of a black box from the outside, and it's not always clear what each of these individuals you're interacting with is doing or what their part of the process is. So hopefully this clears some of that up. If you have any other questions about the hiring process, comment down below. I'll do my best to answer them, or maybe I'll make a follow-up video. That's all for today. Check out howigothired.com for more content like this, and I'll see you in the next one.